can last anywhere between 6 and 12 hours a day. Some areas are often without electricity for days. Economists say the blackouts are costing the country thousands of jobs and damaging its economy. The government and state utility company call that load shedding, and it's angering much of the country.
Yes, I'm very angry. I'm very angry times 100. I'm very angry. Because when I knock out to work, we're supposed to cook, I have to eat bread. It is time that we took a stand as the people of this country against this corrupt government that we have and fight for what we have as rights in this country. It's time for us to stand together.
I'm Shaheen Khan. I'm a member of the shutdown Potchefstroom committee that participated in the shutdown process in Potchefstroom. The Potchefstroom is 120 kilometers west of Johannesburg. It's a small town, relatively small town, but has a working class of about 400,000 people, I think. The EFF had called for a shutdown, but we did not respond to that. It was when the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTA, endorsed the call for a shutdown, saying we're going to be participating on a united front basis, that comrades began organizing this committee, which comprises 14 a steering committee which organizes 14 informal settlements in and around the old group areas, as well as activists and comrades from the other extensions, as well as areas in the old group areas, if one understands South Africa. These are largely black people. By black we mean oppressed people, so-called Indian, colored, and African, and who are far removed from the city center, and suburbia, which comprises largely white and a sprinkling of upper-class blacks in a kind of neo-apartheid setup in our area.
And the power outages, why don't you talk about the effect of the power outages in South Africa, what that has meant for the working class, the poor in South Africa?
Yeah, it's been devastating for people who have had electricity. But if one understands the black areas where we live, large proportions of people living in the informal settlements do not have access to electricity. They've largely got what they call illegal connections they've made to the grid themselves. But the load shedding has just destroyed any access to electricity. For many hours a day, people don't have access to electricity, and it has been particularly devastating to the small business communities in and around the black areas. The businesses in town, for instance, in the city center, have increasingly been dismissing and retrenching workers, and it's had a devastating effect on life in general. For most people, the load shedding is a deliberate attempt to privatize the energy supply and the privatization of the energy supply is aimed at ensuring wealth for those members of the ruling class who are involved in IPPs, alternative power producers, and of course they link to ANC ministers, and one of the famous, I think, ones is Motsepe, who is the brother-in-law of Cyril Ramaphosa. So the general perception is that the load shedding issue is a deliberate issue, and the aim is to destroy the power generation capacity of ESCOM and ensure that we move towards independent power producers and the privatization of the energy sector.
And what happened in this work stoppage protesting the power outages?
They suddenly, when the shutdown began, there was no longer power shortages. The load shedding was reduced by many stages from stage 4 and 5, which it was a few days before then, to stage 2 and 1, but in fact was totally removed, and we've had uninterrupted power for the last 2 days. That is the day of the shutdown and even today. There is talk of load shedding tomorrow, but only stage 1 and 2. Now, this makes people wonder. It is a long weekend here, so there would be a reduction in the demand for power. But it's amazing that the moment the talk of shutdown, then of course power was no longer such a problem. The same thing actually applied when we had water cutouts in our area. We had been having intermittent water cutoffs, supposedly because of load shedding and the inability to pump water up to our areas, while the white areas in town were receiving uninterrupted water supply. We organized a meeting, and where the municipal manager came to address us. The municipal manager didn't have an explanation that was satisfactory, and the community was extremely angry. It was the largest community meeting we've ever had in our community hall. And the police then came to abduct the municipal manager, claiming that we had held him hostage, which there was no truth to. They surrounded the building. They got hold of him. They uplifted his vehicle, and he was then taken away. The next morning, the community organized to go to the municipal offices for a protest. And when we got there, he came to address us, and just suddenly they had found the ability to provide water for us. By 6 p.m. that evening, we were supposed to receive water, but we received water at about 7:30 p.m. For that weekend, we had water, and then the water cutoff started again. The moment people protest, the moment people are ready to fight for what they have, fight for their rights and to access to services, suddenly these services are made available.
And how do you see the future? This was a united front effort. Were the unions involved nationally? And do you think that the labor movement in South Africa is going to unite in action against the power closures and the government, which, according to your report, is actually allowing this kind of power shutdown, particularly of black, working class, poor communities?
Yeah, look, the fact that SAFTA's NEC had called for participation in the shutdown on a united front basis was very positive development. It also allowed many left-wing community-based organizations to endorse the shutdown. In general, people are not supportive of, or left-wingers and activists in communities are not supportive of the economic freedom fighters. The EFF, they often see as left and sometimes right populist, or rather left populist moving dramatically to the right, also embroiled in corrupt activities, as the VBS scandal has indicated. And it's only when SAFTA endorsed the United Front action that activists actually got up to organize. However, within SAFTA, there seems to be huge problems. The labor bureaucracy is an area where people fight for power and for the ability to rule over others and the working class in general. And a big union like NUMSA, for instance, was largely absent from the shutdown activity. In fact, NUMSA was to organize a visit to the bourgeois courts, which was busy adjudicating on its application against load shedding. And rather than participating in mass activity against load shedding and against the cutoff of services or the lack of services, they organized a protest to the High Court in Pretoria. However, because of the shutdown, the High Court application was heard held virtually, and it's only tomorrow that the court will be meeting in person in Pretoria, and NUMSA will be attending the court or having organized its members to participate in a protest at the court. In our view, this is absolutely unacceptable because it is critical that the trade union movement act as a united force. And the differences within the trade union movement are meant to be put aside so that workers could act together and in a united way and show the power of the working class. I suppose you're going to face this kind of problem.
Okay, I want to thank you for joining us on Pacifica. We've been talking with Shaheen Khan. He is an activist, community activist in South Africa who participated in a United Front action against the power outages in South Africa. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.